Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast, where I'm a woman on a mission to help you get the Zettelkasten of your dreams on your work table beside you. Well, today's episode is a little bit of a departure. It comes about from a YouTube show. Did you know that LiLLiPub has its own YouTube channel? Yep, it's at LiLLiPub on YouTube, spelled just like the location, LiLLiPub.org. Well, over on LiLLiPub, we have a weekly show that's called the Zettelkast. And here's what it looks like when you go over to YouTube to see it. It's called the Zettelkast. There's 5 of us, and we each have our Zettelkastens. And the show is about us showing how we work with our Zettelkastens, and we do it in some kind of a game form. We always have fun. We rotate presenters, and each presenter comes up with an interesting challenge that lets us show off our Zettelkastens and show how we work with them. Well, I was the host for this morning's episode, and one of the challenges that I brought out, which was for the second part, sort of the fill-in piece, if you will, was I invited all of the cast members to identify a card in their Zettelkasten that made a surprising connection, to show the card it connected to, and explain the surprise. Well, I have it set up in my down-facing camera where I can show you the card that I chose for that and the interesting surprise that it offers, because it also relates back to the Zettelkast, because in the Zettelkast we are team writing a story, and the surprise element has to do in part with story, and it also connects to Adler. Many of you know that I did a whole series on how to read a book, and even quite recently I did an episode on how to create a little mini bib cards on a ring, because I wanted to have available his methods, have them close at hand when I'm reading. Well, I didn't make a mention of it at the time when I was doing my series, but I skipped over quite a number of chapters in this book. I went straight from analytical reading to syntopical reading, totally bypassing all of the chapters that Adler provides for how to read certain types of books. He has a chapter on how to read history, how to read mathematics, how to read philosophy, and in particular, he has a chapter 15, on suggestions for reading stories, plays, and poetry. And the other piece of the surprise connection has to do with stories. So I'm not going to keep you in suspense any longer. Come on over to the down-facing camera. I'll show you the card that I pulled. I'll show you the conversation it joined, and we'll talk about where the surprise element came in. See you over there. Okay, here's the card that I pulled from the series that I did, Adler's How to Read a Book. And this card makes a rather interesting point that understanding a book begins with coming to terms. Adler talks about how important it is to understand how the author uses certain key terms in his presentation. And the author will usually take great pains to make you aware of exactly how he's using those terms. And if you don't take the time and trouble to identify those terms and connect with the author's understanding, you're going to be greatly hampered in understanding that book. So that's a straightforward enough card. So where did this card want to go? This card chose as its parent another Sertalanges' card. He's kind of really populated my very, very early Zettelkasten. And this thought was that we read great books to gain wisdom, not the acquisition of scattered truths. And it turns out that this card has been something of a magnet in my Zettelkasten. It's an entire fascinating conversation has sprung up around it, as you can see from this card's directory card. Here is our card that we just were talking about, coming to terms with the author. But there's another rather interesting one that is pretty important, which is that without wisdom, what we read is worthless. Certainly ties together, wisdom and wisdom. And way down here in D, the last one in, is a really interesting quote from a personal conversation I had with Paul Hauser. And he's talking about a well-written scientific paper is like a poem. And I added my reaction that it's densely packed and possibly full of non-obvious wisdom, just as a poem is. And the other card that joined this conversation is that questions keep both sides of our brain reading. Well, comes out of my reflection. What Adler said was ask questions while you read, questions that you yourself must try to answer in the course of reading. And to my way of thinking, it's a prescription for getting both sides of your brain going, because the less verbal side of your brain loves puzzles. And when you ask questions, you're throwing puzzles at the other side of your brain. It perks it up. It's like, ooh, ooh, candy, ooh, ooh, and it comes to join the party. So where's the surprise? To me, the surprise comes in with a strange juxtaposition of understanding and wisdom. Understanding and wisdom are certainly not synonymous. That brings up a question. Is understanding always a prerequisite to wisdom? Is there any wisdom that can be gained without first acquiring understanding? Certainly not all understanding leads to wisdom. Some understanding can simply be the understanding of scattered truths, the very opposite thought to this one. So under what conditions might you find yourself gaining wisdom absent understanding? And that brought me back to Adler's book, specifically to his chapter on suggestions for reading stories, plays, and poems. What Adler suggests for reading stories is that you read the story in as compact a time frame as possible. Don't drag it out over weeks if you can. Read it. If you could read it all in one sitting, that would be the dream. Read it closely compacted together, and read it as deeply as possible. Read it quickly, read it immersively, throw yourself into it, throw all disbelief out, put yourself in the mind of the characters, get yourself into the scenes, and just dive into it and kind of just soak in it. And when you come out, what are you going to come out with? If it's a great book, well, we read great books to acquire wisdom. Where in that methodology of reading in a compact fashion, reading quickly, reading immersively, did understanding come into that equation? No, it didn't. Did Adler have you coming to terms with your fictional author? No, he didn't. But if it's a great fiction, we expected to gain wisdom. So, can we gain wisdom without first gaining understanding? Interesting question. And that is the real point of this particular podcast, because that's the very kind of fascinating question that you can find yourself endlessly entertained with when you keep a Zettelkasten. That is the source of energy for continuing between that and the surprise connections. It's part of why a Zettelkasten can be so addictive. Once you get over the hurdle, once it's no longer hard, and quickly it becomes no longer hard, then you just get so many delights from it. And all of these fascinating questions that can pop into your mind and give you endless delight is part of the reason why it's wonderful to keep a Zettelkasten. And that's my episode for tonight. Bye-bye.